If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the most paranormal or unexplainable events you have witnessed? The town I grew up in had some nice falls about a half hour away, and on the way there, when you're on the state park grounds, there's like this big wall. There are steps leading up to like a picnic area with a great view. I'd been there loads of times with my family. One night, I was staying at my best friend's house. His older brother and girlfriend were there and they wanted to go to the falls at night, so my best friend and I tagged along. His brother drove. So we get close and we're about to pass that wall, and as we're driving by it, we all saw a little girl. She couldn't be more than 10 years old, wearing pale dress or something, standing near the line separating the road from the shoulder where people would pull over and park to go have a picnic. We pulled over after we saw her. There are no other cars anywhere, and the girl is gone, and we just look around, calling out, and there's just nothing. Personally, I would have thought I was just seeing things, but literally everyone saw it too. Enough for the older brother to say, "Holy shit, was that a little girl?" as he was pulling over. Lechusa. Described to me as a witch/owl demon. The legend I heard when I was little was that if you were outside late at night and whistled 3 times, Lechusa would come and snatch you. When I was around 20, I shared this story with my friend one night and we kinda joked around about it along with sharing other paranormal stories. Eventually I have to grab something from my car outside. It was a beautiful clear night, very quiet, and we were kinda out in the country. While I'm searching the trunk, my friend lets out a whistle while standing next to his front door. He was laughing, knowing it creeped me out, and let out another whistle. I was a little pissed that he was screwing with me and tried to hurry up because I was also a little creeped out. Then he let out a third whistle. At the exact second his whistle stopped, I heard this loud, terrifying screech right above my head. It sounded exactly like an Aztec death whistle. Look it up on YouTube. I was immediately startled and looked to my friend. I thought he made the noise to fuck with me, but his face was looking back at mine in terror. When I saw his face I knew it wasn't him and booked it into his house. When we got inside we kept repeating, "What the fuck? Lol." I figured it was just an owl that mistook the whistle for a squeaking rodent, but it really freaked me out considering it followed the legend I heard with the 3 whistles. Shared this story with another friend years later and he wanted to try it and did. But nothing happened. Now I sound crazy, lol. Oh, I have lots of these. But the most terrifying one was 8 years ago. I was 19. I was watching TV on the couch, alone at the living room, when I felt someone looking at me. It was that chill that runs up your spine, a suspicion. I looked back and I couldn't believe it. There he was, this huge, very tall shadow man. He seemed to be wearing a hat and he was purely shadow. Pure blackness as he was made out of the void. And I didn't just catch a glimpse of him. As I stared, there he was. Looking at me with no eyes. Trying to seem bigger, scarier than death. Bringing cold weather and loneliness along. My mother was having a rough time. She was very depressed and emotionally unstable. We had been fighting a lot during that time. I could feel he was there for her. He wanted to scare me. I started to pray, though I wasn't religious. Started to ask guardian angels to take him away, to protect me and my house, to take him wherever he needed to go. I couldn't move. I could only pray for solid 20 minutes, eyes closed, still feeling his presence. Until I could move again. I turned off the TV and carefully went up the stairs. I was afraid of being pushed down. As I was walking up, the whole staircase became involved in a thick odorless fog. I could barely breathe. I started to pray again. Sat on my bed, terrified. The fog dissipated and I lay down to sleep. And soon as I closed my eyes, 3 bright flashlights blew before my eyes. That's when I said fuck it, grabbed my pillow and went into my sister's room. "May I sleep on the floor?" "Sure, why?" "There are dead people in my room, okay?" I studied a bit and learned that flashlights are usually benevolent spirits helping us. My sister wasn't fazed because things like that are not old news around here. Everyone in the family is a psychic. My mother, my father, myself, my sister, my cousins, aunts and uncles, 2 of my grandparents. It's a recurring topic of conversation in my family. But I won't lie, this time it was scary as hell. I've had a few experiences. But the most confirmed that I have is when my ex, myself and a friend got an apartment together. She would ask if we used her private bathroom, which we never did. But she said she would come home and her mats in her bathroom would be thrown all over. Then later on she was woken up by a voice that said, "Look over here," and she did and saw her keys jingling by the door. She said she rolled over to ignore it to pretend it wasn't there. She moved out shortly after that, so the room was empty. Afterwards, my ex and I saw/heard weird things from that room. One time I was in the living room and heard the shower curtain slide open, The door closed on its own, heard movement that shouldn't be there. My ex started using the closet in that room to get changed while I was sleeping since he had to be up at 3 a.m. He said one morning he went to get his uniform and his clothes moved around before he touched any of them. After all of this, a friend and I hung out in the room with a recording device trying to do ghost hunter shit. We did capture some noise from the bathroom, but the only voice recorded that wasn't ours said shut the door. When I was in junior high school, I was good friends with a girl who had some mental health issues. She was smart but had been held back due to absenteeism, whether that was due to appointments, hospitalizations, truancy, not sure. She frequently talked about jinn, a type of demon in her culture. She grew up in Iraq and her family had been persecuted. She might have had PTSD, recalling some other behaviors. She was completely positive jinn had followed her from Iraq, and it was why her family was haunted by bad luck, her father's anger, their poverty, her mother's sickness, her own nightmares, failing grades, and sadness. She saw jinn everywhere, dark shadows all around our high school and classroom. Sometimes I couldn't find her at lunch because she'd just lock herself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out until they were gone. I went to her house for a sleepover once and saw flickers of shadows in my periphery all evening. The air felt thick and oppressive, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, there was a silhouette standing over me. I pretended to be asleep and it was gone in the morning. Obviously, in retrospect, I saw those things because her house was dark and her mother was a hoarder, items piled across the windows and everything covered in dust. And the silhouette was a family member. But at the time, because my friend always ranted and raved with such conviction about misfortune from the jinn, I was convinced it was an unexplained event. The summer between middle and high school, my mom and I were taking a shortcut through a local cemetery. I've heard/felt a lot of weird shit in my life and I can write almost all of it off as random noise or house settling or someone fucking with me, but seeing a black dog as big as I was appear from behind a gravestone, run across the path, and disappear behind another grave? I have no explanation. The graves were freestanding too, no bushes or anything for a dog that size to hide in. Scared the pants off me and I basically demanded we GTFO, real dog or fake ghost dog. I did not want to die. When I was about 7, my grandma was super into camping. She has 2 cabins now, too, so she got us walkie-talkies. I had a friend across the street that I loved playing with, and we had the idea to test out these walkies with a game of hot and cold hide and seek. Eventually, after the games were over, we were all in the same room when our walkies were tuned into and we heard a faint whisper of a little girl. It was muffled, but I promise you that this hasn't left my mind in years. I remember it so vividly. Come find me. Me and my friend stared at each other. The walkie pack came in 5, but the 2 we had were the only ones with batteries in them. It repeated again, but with more clarity. Come find me in the pantry. The only place we assumed the voice was talking about was the pantry, which was a pair of sliding metal doors with slits in them, much like a locker in the laundry room. We opened it, but it was only food. It repeated again a couple times, before stopping away, or becoming unintelligible. It was infrequent in the intervals it was happening. It was seemingly random, but interrupting conversation over what the heck happened. We did talk over the walkie to ask who this was, but there was only the in the pantry. As a response, needless to say, my grandma happily trashed those walkies and got new ones. And as if that wasn't like Goosebumps mating with a creepypasta enough, I believe shortly after my friend's family started moving away from the cul-de-sac my grandma was in. I haven't been in contact with them since. I was 19, driving around town with a friend sometime after midnight, talking shit and listening to music. We drive past this road with a signpost to an area neither of us heard of despite both of us living in town our whole lives. I asked if she wanted to see where the road went. She said yes, so I pull a U-turn and off we go. It's a paved road, heavy trees on each side and a few houses. Nothing unusual for either of us. I was living on a street like that at the time. Anyway, within about 5 minutes, the conversation just kind of dies off. And a few minutes after that, I start to get an uneasy feeling. Then we passed a kangaroo on the side of the road. It remained perfectly still, just turning its head to watch us drive past, and I got the distinct impression it was standing guard. After that, I just got more and more anxious. I ended up turning to my friend and saying, "This is going to sound stupid, but can you?" She was already taking her seatbelt off. "I'll lock the back doors." We kept following the road even after that because we're stubborn bitches and don't know when to admit defeat. It was at least half an hour, because my 60-minute cassette tape had flipped over twice, between pulling onto the paved road and coming to a sign saying dirt road ahead. By this stage I felt physically sick and my skin was crawling. Without a word, I did the quickest 3-point turn I was able to do and we headed back down the road. The closer we got back to the turnoff, the better I felt until we were back on the main road where I felt like I could breathe easily again. We told a few people about it, got brushed off mostly. We didn't even drive past that turnoff without flinching or shuddering for a few months, the feeling of dread had been that strong. Then about 6 months later, she turns to me out of nowhere and said let's drive it during the day. So we went. My friend has both her phone and mine on her lap with emergency numbers punched in. We're playing upbeat pop music to try and keep us calm. It took us less than 5 minutes to reach the dirt road, and on checking the odometer, the paved section was only 1 kilometer long. Once again, we got the fuck out of there. Have never been back. No idea what the hell was going on that night, but I can say with certainty that we were not meant to be there. Even 20 years later, if someone mentions the area on the signpost, we shudder, and recently I turned to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, was that you with me on the road where?" Yes. And I don't want to talk about it. About 10 p.m. Sunday night in February 1994. Salt Lake City, Utah. Driving toward home with a friend along Route 215 southbound at the point where a wall of mountain was to our left, and we were up high enough to see across the entire valley to our right. It was dark as a normal night, street lights, building lights, but everything dark enough for sleepy nighttime hours. When suddenly the entire valley lit up bright pink, as bright as day, evenly lit as far as the eye could see from horizon to horizon. Bright pink. Both my friend and I saw it, we verbalized it to each other, and it lasted no more than 5 seconds, then everything went back to normal night color. No sounds ever occurred, just a normal quiet night before, during, and after. This was back before the internet, and we saw nothing about it in the newspaper the next day or the next, and being college-age working girls, we were too busy to watch television news or consult the newspaper every day to follow up. No one else mentioned it or noticed it. Seemed like we were the only ones out that night. But surely someone else must have seen it too. I was staying over at a dorm for a week-long high school field trip. This facility was known for its strange occurrences. Each room had 2 twin beds, but we each got our own. After the lights out calls, my friend and I would communicate through knocks against the walls, since we were in adjacent rooms. Most of the kids had moved rooms as we were staying in the section with a lot of activity. Me and my friend were the only 2 staying in this section. The third night in after the lights out call, we do our usual knocking routine. We stopped after a while and I started to drift to sleep, then I heard rapid knocking coming from his wall. I didn't sit up because I assumed he would stop and go to sleep, but the knocking continued up the wall and onto the ceiling directly above me. This confused me greatly as I was on the very top floor. I flip over and face the wall, utterly terrified. The hallway lights remain on throughout the night, but absolutely no one is allowed to leave their rooms. However, footsteps approached my dorm door and I saw the shadow off of the wall of someone just standing there. Then the footsteps continued inside of my door, but the door did not open. Then the footsteps and whistling continued until it was right behind me. Then it stopped. I whipped my head around only to find nothing, but then I saw the shadow of someone outside my door. Then it ran away to the dead end side of the hall. I opened the door only to find no one. My friend next door had heard everything from the footsteps to the knocking and he thought it was me the whole time. This was my first ever strange experience that I could not find an explanation to. Childhood house was filled with paranormal activity. We moved into the house when it was brand new. To this day when I go visit my parents I still see shit at the age of 29. My mom has seen things. Their dogs spook every once in a while. My girlfriend has seen things as well. And one of my friends has seen it and even said when he went home he had a sleep paralysis dream about it. All of the same kind of figure, the very same figure that I saw in a sleep paralysis dream. Super tall, slender, figure that has a high-pitched shrill for a scream, in the dream I had. It stood next to me while I was working in the garage on a car. As soon as I noticed it I became overwhelmed with a deep sadness. It has hugged my mom and comforted her with warmth. It has held me down in my dreams and attempted to kill me on more than one occasion. It has caused the dogs to lose their shit countless times barking at the upstairs hallway of the house. One reason my parents don't let them sleep upstairs anymore because they will just endlessly bark at night at the hallway. My girlfriend has seen a dark figure walk by the door in the very same hallway. She thought it was me, but I was downstairs, and there was no one else in the house. She doesn't believe in ghosts, but it definitely piqued her interest wondering what it was. I've heard the occasional talking from it. More like fast-paced whispers. To top it all off, every time I'm there in the evening, I just have this overwhelming heavy feeling and it feels like something is staring at me piercingly. I did a little research on the area a few years ago and got weirded out by it a bit. It's an area called Mesa Rock that has rocks that all are shaped to be pointing towards the sky. Nobody knows who or how the rocks were moved there, and they don't think they are natural formations. Supposedly an Indian tribe used to live on the land, never could confirm that though. On the way home from a wedding with my partner, who was driving, and the kids flat out after picking them up from the babysitter. I was stone cold sober, because I didn't think it would be fair for me to drink if he was driving. We were really close to home when I saw some kind of light flash just ahead of us, as did my partner, so he slowed right down. When I looked up, I swear to God all I could see was the underside of a plane as if it was just about to land behind us. I said it in such a panic that my partner stopped the car suddenly. When I told him in a slightly less panicky voice, he just stared at me as if I'd just lost the plot. Where we were you would have difficulty flying a little drone, never mind a giant plane. We drove on around 200 meters, with me saying I swear to God it was a dark green color and I could see the 2 landing gears towards the back. My partner just stopped the car in the middle of the road and I looked. It was like there were 2 little balls of fire floating above us, about 2 stories high, in front of the car. We jumped out, it was safe, no traffic, all you could smell was burning, and it got really foggy, but it started off as 2 floating balls of fire, but when we looked around you could see loads through the fog. We watched them for about 2 minutes and then all of a sudden they all flew off in different directions. Our house was 2 minutes away, we got the kids inside then went online to see if we could figure it out but we couldn't. Happened about 2 years ago near Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My wife and I were visiting a friend that went to school there. We were looking for things to do and he mentioned there was an abandoned insane asylum nearby. As a photographer I was intrigued, so we decided to go the next day since it was late at night and none of us had the guts to go when it was dark. The next day at around 11 a.m. we decided to head over to this abandoned insane asylum and check it out. All we knew was that a lot of frats and sororities did a lot of hazing type stuff there, so we figured it'd be fun checking it out. Once we arrived we had to park and walk down a long driveway due to a gate with a no trespassing sign posted. This asylum dated back to Civil War times, back then it had to be self-sustaining. So on either side of us were dead cornfields, so there was nothing but fields on either side. As we got the front of the building we heard the sound of banging metal on metal. We chopped it up to the wind and continued on. Once we stepped in the front lobby we noticed a significant drop in temperature. It was about 80 degrees outside but inside it felt as if it in the 50s. We immediately felt heavy energy so we decided to walk around the outskirts of the different corridors of the building instead. We checked out the crematory, dining hall, and a few living quarters and then we found ourselves back at the front lobby. Once we stepped inside that heavy energy was back, we hadn't felt it at any of the other corridors we visited and wanted to go back again. We decided to leave but my friend wanted to see if we could get upstairs. We hesitantly agreed to check it out. The stairs were in bad shape and seemed like there was no way they would support our body weight, so we decided to head back to the car. As we were walking back to the main lobby, my wife and friend were already out of the front door. I had my camera out and was getting a few last shots. When I looked down the hallway to my left, I saw a man in an old tuxedo walking towards me with his head down. He was quite large and had an old cap on. I immediately yelled to run, and was yelling, "There's a man in a tuxedo?" As we ran back to the car my friend asked if I seriously saw something or was just messing around. As he said that I looked at him and over his shoulder, the same man was walking towards us, but from the dead cornfield about 50 yards away from us, coming from our immediate left. When we got back to the car we looked behind us and saw nothing. Being from Houston I've seen plenty of homeless people doing plenty of wild things. But when I saw this man walking towards us, I felt like I was in immediate danger of something very evil. When we got back to his dorm we googled the place to see if there was any stories of paranormal events. Sure enough, other people had reported that they had been chased off the property by a very dark, large figure of a man that seemed to teleport in a supernatural way. Still freaks me out to wonder what would have happened if we went up the stairs. Would this man have gotten between us and the only entrance/exit to the building? I and 2 of my friends went camping for 2 nights several months ago. We would have preferred to backpack but one person didn't have the equipment, so we hiked in about a mile from the trailhead and set up camp there, and did loop hikes in the area each day. We left the car locked and, this detail will become important later, had tons of food in the trunk, including a large bag of almonds. We don't eat any of the almonds until dinner time of the second day, when we eat a few, leaving the bag still about 3/4 full and again lock it in the car. We then go on a quick hike, no more than 2 hours. We get back to the car and I start doing something, when my friend tells me something to the effect of "Did we really eat this many almonds?" and holds up the somehow almost empty bag. Mind you, this is a very large bag. All 3 of us are completely mystified. We all agree that bag was still nearly full when we left. The car is still locked with no sign of a break-in, and there's no evidence of a large animal having gotten into them. We didn't find any large spills of almonds either in the car or anywhere near it. No explanations make any logical sense. We were super weirded out, and to this day the disappearing almonds have remained an unsolved mystery. First of all, I'm writing this from my phone, so I apologize for any mistakes. And it's probably stupid long to read, so I apologize. This story is a mixture of my personal experiences and my mom's. This all took place in about 6 months when we moved out to go back to our hometown. I was in 2nd grade when my family moved to Texarkana, Arkansas, so that my dad could attend police academy or SWAT school or something, I don't remember exactly. Anyways, we moved into this older home, but was plenty nice for me. The layout was a bit strange in my opinion. You walk into the kitchen from the carport, and directly to the left is a pantry, and next to that was my bedroom. Through my bedroom you could reach the master bedroom, and through that room the other room that could go to the 3rd bedroom. They were all connected with access to the living room or kitchen. Really weird. So my room was the 1st bedroom and was pretty small, but it was mine and I loved it. We previously lived in a small single wide, which was cramped for my parents, 2 sisters and myself. Well, I loved my room initially, but I remember liking it less and less each day. I began to get scared of that room. I would go in it to play with my toys, but only with the door open, and I would sit just in the doorway. My parents repainted my room for me to try to help me like it more. Bright yellow. No idea why that color. It didn't help. In a desperate, loving attempt to help me, my parents gave me the big master BR and they took my little room. Cool. But the master BR had no windows. WTF. I don't know how long I had been staying in the room, but one night I woke up in the middle of the night. No windows. Pitch fucking black. No bueno for a 7-year-old or however old I was in 2nd grade. I woke up to the pitch black and instantly had this horrible feeling. Chills. The feeling that I was being watched from the blackness. Being watched from the darkness of my room. I pulled the covers over my head and just waited. I could feel the presence of something. Something evil standing right beside my bed. Now I'm not super religious, but I do believe in God. I remember laying there praying that if I did that night, if I would go to heaven. I repeated it over and over and over, just waiting for the end. I was absolutely terrified. I said that till I fell asleep and woke up the next morning. That was my encounter. My mom told me later her experiences. I'll make it quick. She would be in the back doing whatever and hear a thump. Go in the living room and a candle would have fallen off of the coffee table. Put it back, go back to whatever and hear it again. Go back. Candle on the floor. Freak out. Get gun. Call my granddad. Clear house. Clear. Clueless. Stuff like that. Our lights in the house at one point began to flicker quite a bit. Parents called an electrician who came and went into the attic to investigate. Dude came down looking white as a ghost. Would not tell my mom what he saw, but said he would never ever come back to that house. That's really about it that we encountered that we remember. Mom said when we moved it, she found a Ouija board in the closet. Moved out of the house and within a month it burned to the ground. This was the summer of 2006. I was 16 years old and this was my first time being back home, Mexico, since coming to the US in 2001. As soon as I arrived, I am greeted by all of my little cousins, all talking to me at once. One of them said something that stuck out to me. Mom, tell him about the flying man. Now I come from a very small town in a small city in Mexico, and most people tend to be very superstitious and believe in the afterlife. So my aunt goes on to tell me about how people have recently seen a man flying around town. I chuckled and think to myself, superstition, some things never change, and went on about my day. Now a few days later I am hanging out with some cousins and a few friends on top of my grandma's house. It's about 3 a.m. and we're just shooting the shit. We planned on spending the night on top of her house, flat roof, pretty common for young kids to do in summer, so we had a few covers with us to lay on the ground. We are all just talking, making jokes, when I happened to notice a man figure crouching on top of a tree, on the corner home opposite of my grandma's street. Now this street was a straight shot, about 20 houses on each side, all with either 1 to 2 fully grown trees on the front yard. My grandma's house was located pretty much in the middle of one side of the street. I stare at this figure trying to make up what it is for sure, when I see it fully stand up and start to sprint at full speed, from tree to tree as if there was ground for him to step on, and stop dead on his track at the house in front of my grandma's, while he stared right at me. I couldn't make a figure, but if I had to compare it to anything, I'd compare it to the thing on Keepers Creepers. I could believe what I was seeing, so I stood there in shock. Then I managed to get down under the covers and start screaming. That when everyone started asking me what was wrong, and when I told them and pointed to the tree, there was nothing there. Now I was completely sober, no drugs or anything. And I know exactly what I saw. Just now why I saw it. Never seen anything like that since, nor do I want to. When I was about 3 years old, we lived in some old and military housing. Not bad old, just old. My older brother's room was directly across the landing from my mother's room, and his window was directly across from her bedroom door. If the moon shone through his window, which it was in this little tale, it went straight across the second floor into my mom's room. My toddler bed had been moved out from my own room for a reason I don't remember, perfectly placed so that the moon shone right on my bed through my brother's window. It had those thick plastic bars, and I was peeking through them spying on my brother when suddenly there was a shadow on the floor. The moonlight from Big Bro's room, and it stretched nearly to my bed. Then it started walking very slowly towards me. I wasn't scared at first, just very curious. I poked my head up from the bars, but there was no one on the landing. No shadow either. I went back down, and the shadow reappeared, closer. It kept walking, eventually nearly reaching my bedside, when I felt something pressing down on me, not like a tangible weight, but a crushing feeling and a deep, deep fear. I describe it now as a fight or flight reaction, as if my toddler brain knew I was in danger. I turned my head to look up, and there was a dark wispy figure leaning over my bed, and there were no eyes, but it was staring at me. I was terrified but still very curious. I wanted to talk to it so badly, but instead I jumped out of my bed and climbed in with Mom. Eventually, the deep fear receded, and I felt the dark presence fade. I'm honestly not really sure what I saw, but I know I wasn't dreaming. It wasn't the only time I had seen something I couldn't explain either, and I spent most of my childhood trying to explain that yes, I really did see that. No, I'm not making it up. No, I wasn't dreaming. I was living in a house in Florida with 3 other guys. The house belonged to one friend, Jason. He had lived there with his family as a child before they moved to California and had moved back in with another friend, Carl, to attend college. Jason and Carl had been living in the house for about a year before I moved into the house with another friend, Mike. A few months before I moved in, I flew to Florida to visit Jason and Carl. I noticed a few strange things during my week-long visit. Figures moving in the corner off my vision, small items moving around, nothing I couldn't explain or chalk up to my imagination. It wasn't until after I moved in before I really started to notice the weirdness that was going on. A few days in, I had set up an air mattress in my room. I filled it completely with a little battery-powered pump and screwed on the cap tightly. We all went out to get some food and returned to find the air mattress completely deflated with the cap removed. The thing was flattened completely as though someone had sucked all of the air out. Anyone who has packed one of these up knows the trial of rolling the mattress up to get all of the air out so it will fit back in the box. I also continued to notice small things not being where I had left them, and continued to see figures in the corner of my vision. Specifically, I began to notice a featureless, child-sized shadow figure, but I never saw it directly. Only in reflections and at the edges of my vision. A reoccurring phenomenon I noticed was sometimes when I was taking a dump there would be a soft knocking low on the bathroom door. One day the knocking was becoming insistent, and I politely asked it to stop so I could shit in peace, and it stopped immediately. After a few weeks living there, I brought up the knocking and the shadow figure to Jason and Carl. This was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. They looked at each other with frightened expressions and told me that they had been experiencing the same things. Jason revealed that he and his brother had noticed them back when they were living in the house as children. Additionally, as children, Jason and his brother used to hear disembodied giggling in the room that I was staying in. A few come to mind, but one stands out more than the rest. I was 14 at the time. The town I live in is at the base of a mountain and surrounded by thick forest. I was, and still am, very fond of taking long treks on unknown paths. I was also staying to dabble in pagan stuff. Runes, gods, spirits. The good stuff. One day, I got lost. Didn't immediately notice this, as I was just enjoying my day. The sun was up, saw some wildlife, it was great. Around 5 p.m. I wanted to head back, so I tried to get my bearings. Couldn't figure out where I was, so I started walking in the direction I thought was the way home. Bad idea. I got even more lost. It was getting late and light was failing. Plus I had no light source of my own. I started panicking. In a moment of desperation I drew Vegvisir on the ground with a stick, and prayed to the forest to guide me home. Everything went silent. Again, I was rather oblivious to this. The wind picked up from behind me and gently started blowing down the path. I went in that direction, almost like being guided. Slowly, I could hear birds, but only in the direction I was going. At every fork in the path, The wind would blow and stir the leaves on the path, and I always felt as if someone was gently touching my shoulder and pushing me in the right direction. It was about 7 p.m. at this point, and the forest was getting darker. I could hear large animals behind the trees, but I couldn't stop walking. I was now lawfully following the wind and the birds. After another hour, I finally came upon what looked like a park at the edge of town. I was still in the forest, but I could see the clearing and the sunlight. I picked up the pace. The wind quickened as well, to the point where leaves were dancing in a flurry in front of me, some meters away from the exit. In that flurry, I swore I could see a shape. Slender, beautiful, floating a few centimeters from the ground. I stopped dead in my tracks. The being, shape, form, whatever it was, saw my confusion and fear, and gestured me towards the exit before giving a small bow. Then it hit me. I knew what I was seeing. The only thing I did was give a low bow in reply. The being beckoned me forward, so I complied. As I got close, I could see a face of sorts that looked as if she was smiling. I was holding my breath the entire time. Once I got near the exit, the wind died down, and the leaves fell back on the ground. I exited the path, and was once again in town. I saw people in the park, I could hear town noises. I looked back towards the path one last time, only to see a light flicker between the trees, kind of like eyes. I gave one more bow, and said, "Thank you." The flicker vanished. I always ask for permission and thank the forest or mountains when I leave. Because I know they are there, watching over me. I was around 9 years old, I don't remember exact dates, this is the best I can retell, and I'm on mobile so forgive any bad spelling. I finally decided to read a weird book that I had for a while. I don't remember much about it other than the fact there was the text on the left and illustrations on the right, and I skipped to the last page. The illustration on the page had skulls on them but they weren't realistic in any way. I thought nothing of it as I forgot about it till that night. I was always scared of the dark and even now I can get pretty paranoid of it, so I had the hall light on, and my air mattress keeping the door open. Back then I slept on my stomach, and when I got into that position a ghost appeared at the foot of my bed. The details of the ghost are rather hazy and I didn't get a clear look at the face, but I remember it was humanoid, probably female, really tall, 7 to 8 feet, and had cut off arms a bit below the shoulder. I quickly turned to look at her only for her to vanish in white smoke. At first I tried to ignore it and turned back to try and sleep again to see the smoke rematerialize, and turned back quickly again, only for it to disappear again. At that point I was freaked out and got up to go tell my mom, who simply told me to go sleep in my sister's room, which did make me feel a bit safer. I turned on the closet light and went to lay down in her bed. At that point the first thing that was weird to me was I saw a reflection in the window that looked to me like some kind of mural about cowboys. I found out in the morning it was still there and just a reflection of a messy closet. The other thing that happened not long after was when I closed my eyes and felt a lick on my cheek. There was a big dog plushie next to me. I opened my eyes and looked at it for a bit before finally getting some rest. After that night nothing like it happened to me again, but I also never saw that book again. Either way I didn't question it all that much after that, but I still remember it as a rather scary experience. Oh boy, my time to shine. So I'm usually skeptical about the supernatural or unexplainable. Still am in terms of ghosts and stuff, but there was this one very odd experience a year ago that has burned into my mind, because I cannot to this day rationalize it. So in my room, I only have a bed and a drawer, both of which have high legs so you can reach under them easily. After I use my phone before bed, as many do, I place it on the floor right next to me. I've done this for 2 years at this point, since we moved, so when I woke up one morning and it wasn't there, I was a little weirded out. But whatever, I'm forgetful, so I start feeling around the bed to see if I laid down on it during the night. I knock something over with my hand and it falls through the crack made by the bed and the wall, hitting the floor with a thud. Found it, I thought, and bend down to look under the bed frame. I see my phone at the corner, but it was out of my reach, so I get a shirt and swing it really hard to push it out. This is where it gets weird. My phone had a mat case, and makes a distinct sound whenever it slides. I hear this sound as the phone slides across the floor and hits the wall. So I get up and go to where it went, and find nothing. My room was extra clean that morning, so a quick visual scan determined that there was nothing on the floor. In my confused, barely awake state, I walk into the living room where I see my phone placed neatly on my couch, right in the middle of the cushion. To this day, I have no idea how to explain this. I remember everything so distinctly, and picking up my phone I could only ask myself what in the hell was underneath my bed. One day I was with my friends and suddenly my head started getting heavy and my vision began to white out at the point where I couldn't see anything at all. I immediately thought that someone could have drugged me and asked my friends to help me walk to a place where I could get some air and sit down. My sight was coming back, but I couldn't speak or express anything, couldn't respond or answer what my friends were asking. Somehow I got into a trance and it felt like I was seeing my surroundings from an above me perspective. My friend called my mom and she picked me up. I still couldn't respond until I got home and went to the bathroom. 3 days later my mom received a call from my grandpa and I immediately knew what was going on. He told her that my dad had passed away and was found dead in his bathroom. I live with my mom and my dad used to live in another state. The forensic report showed that he died in that exact date and probably around the moment I've had that episode. My stepdad found our puppy Eddie on the side of the road. Someone had thrown him out of a moving car, and he had broken legs, broken teeth, a swollen and closed eye, and was severely dehydrated. My stepdad took him to the vet and paid quite a bit of money for surgeries to get Eddie fixed up. He got attached to the doggo, so we ended up adopting him. After that, even though he was the family dog, he was best buds with my stepdad. Anywhere my stepdad was around the house, you could find Ed tagging along. Eddie and I grew up together. He died while I was in college, and my parents buried him in a pet cemetery. Since it was sort of sudden and I was far away, I didn't get to say goodbye. A few months after that, I had a dream where Eddie comes and find me. His hair is matted and dirty, and his flesh looks kind of rotted, but he's wagging his tail and seems really happy to see me again. Eddie starts leading me down a hazy path, and the farther we go, the faster his tail wags. Finally, we get to this giant wall of mist that extends across the entire horizon and rises higher than I can see. Eddie gets real close to it before trotting back to me. He licks my hand, gives me a couple of nose boops and whines a little. Then he turns around again and starts to do that happy dog prance toward the wall until he finally passes through it. I can sort of see his outline jumping up and down excitedly next to a human-shaped figure. I jog after Eddie and reach my hand out to touch the wall, hoping I'll be able to pass through it, too. That's when my cell phone rings in real life, waking me up. When I answer it, my mom is on the other end crying. My stepdad had just died of a heart attack. When I was in high school, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom. His bed was on one side of the room and mine was on the other. My brother was an avid sleepwalker and would also talk in his sleep all of the time. Sharing a bedroom with him, it was unsettling at first, but I eventually got used to it. One night, it's about 3 a.m. and I suddenly wake up from a deep sleep, instantly alert. I had this urge to look towards my brother's bed. I felt a presence in the room. When I turned my head, I saw a tall, skinny shadow/human-like figure and it was reaching its hand down towards my sleeping brother's face. Its hand got maybe an inch away before its head jerked to the side, and looked at me staring at it, frozen. The shadow then faded and moved up into the air, vanishing through the ceiling. Immediately, my brother shot up out of his bed, stood, and walked to the light switch. He turned it on and looked at me. In a very calm and solemn voice, he says, "Did you feel it? Did you feel the hand?" He then turned off the light and went back to his bed. I hid under my covers the rest of the night. My brother doesn't remember any of it. This is my dad's story, not mine. When my dad was in his 20s he lived by himself in a studio apartment. He used to work really late hours, so he'd come home around 2 a.m. a month after moving into his apartment. He came home, washed up, and went to bed. About an hour later he woke up because he felt pressure on his chest. It was almost as though someone was sitting on his. So he lies there struggling to breathe for what seems like an eternity, and just when he starts feeling like he's about to pass out, the pressure suddenly disappears. Obviously, he was freaked out, but he decided to let it go. A few weeks later, my dad had plans to go out with friends, so he was in the bathroom taking a shower when suddenly the water gets unbearably hot. After trying, unsuccessfully, to change the water temperature, he decided to just step out of the shower. Except he couldn't. Now, my dad definitely developed a dad bod after my brother and I were born, but before that he was a pretty muscular guy, so the fact that the shower door would not budge no matter how hard he tugged on it really says something. He says that it was like someone was holding the door shut. After a while he started to pound on the door to try and break through, but then the door suddenly slides open. Apparently the same exact thing happened when one of his friends came over to use the shower. Needless to say, my dad got the hell out of that apartment as soon as possible. I grew up in a small Midwestern town in a state largely comprised of flat farmland. If you took the old highway east of town maybe 607 miles, you could take a left on a gravel road, and about a mile into that you would just barely see a trail leading farther into the plot. Up here most trees outside of towns are used for shelter against the wind, since the state is so flat. So with the length of the trail and the trees bunched up, The long-ass grass didn't help. Around any buildings, you wouldn't really see what was back there if you only driving by. But of course most of us kids knew there was an old abandoned house back there, so a lot of teenagers went exploring and reported backstories. The rumor was that maybe in the 70s a man killed his wife and kid in that house, and then himself. This of course was the story running around the high school anyway, so it isn't exactly reliable. But it was enough to get the gears going, you know? Kind of like a local ghost story that was all ours, and since I was super into ghosts at the time, and still am, but not in a sexual way or anything, it was enough to get my imagination running. I think the year was 1999, and I was working at the local McDonald's. Teens often took the closing shifts, and a lot of us would hang out at the lake after close or find something to do together. One night we decided to gather a posse to go out and explore this house, so we bought some flashlights from the gas station and headed out. It was just about 1 a.m. when our 9-person group got to the trail. I can't remember exactly how far back the actual buildings were, but it seemed like a long way, and you definitely couldn't see anything else but fields. The first structure we saw was a little lean-to with a tarp flapping, then as you turned a corner a barn and a house. Now I would never claim to be some incredibly brave man, but I will admit that walking through the barn by myself was actually sort of calming, but still in a bit of an unnerving way. The entire back wall of the barn was gone, so you were basically looking out across a moonlit wheat field. Just a really cool scene that I wish I could have taken a picture of. The house was not as calming. First, tons of deviants had already been here, and they had spray-painted words all over. Some dirty words here and there, but also stuff about reading your Bible and random religious phrases that made it kind of creepy, especially at night. Right after you enter the doorway, there are stairs going down to the left, which lead down to a landing and then turns for a few steps. We went down to the landing to check it out, but the floor was flooded at least a foot, but closer to 2. The main floor was pretty messed up, with the walls ripped out and graffiti all over, but the layout wasn't without its charm. You could actually picture a family living there. The stairs going up were above those going down, and lead to a small upstairs room. There were a few kids' shoes laying around, along with some books. What spooked us at first was the blood that was splattered by the window, but we would later learn that some other friends had shot a raccoon there. Eventually we made our way downstairs and heard some rustling in the trees nearby, so started quickly making our way out of the door. Now I don't know what was happening, but somehow the line out of the door got held up, and my friend Chris and I were the last two, right near the downstairs hall. I looked down at one point as someone accidentally aimed a flashlight and saw an arm with a red sleeve extending up to the landing, and briefly a brown shoe stepping up. The line had unjammed at this point, and we had all raced to the vehicles to get the hell out of there. Chris had made an unfortunate wrong turn out of the door and into some trees full of spiderwebs. He ran back and we got the hell out of there, and later I found out that Chris saw the same thing. We thought maybe it was just some guy, but we went downstairs when we got there and didn't see anything, plus you probably would have heard somebody sloshing around in the water. That bothered us both for some time, and we do talk about it occasionally.